For those wondering, it's different. It tastes good. Okay, let's get back on focus. We are studying the Shema, and we're focusing on the words B'chol levavecha, B'chol nafshecha, B'chol me'odecha. We recite it, and every single time we say the Shema, we say those words. B'chol levavecha means with all of your soul, both your godly soul, even your animal soul. Everything should be devoted to God. B'chol nafshecha, we've been explaining, means with the ability to give yourself completely over, even if it calls for self-sacrifice, the complete giving over, b'chol nafshecha, all of your soul. So levavcha is your heart, the emotions of your heart. Nafshecha is the very essence of who you are. And last week we told over some stories of individuals that demonstrated in their life that they were able to give themselves completely over, even if it meant the giving of life. And we explained towards the end of last week's class that Judaism is not looking to get out of this world, to exit this world. In fact, the opposite is true. We want to live. We want to be able to live as a Jew. We want to be able to live as a member of the chosen people. We want to be able to live to contribute to society. We want to be able to live to bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. That is our desire. But if push comes to shove and we are forced to choose between living and rebelling against God, we choose not to rebel against God, even if it means giving up of our very lives. And we have shown throughout history that this is not reserved just for the righteous individuals, but even simple folks always were able to stand up and show that ability of what we call mesiras nefesh. But mesiras nefesh can also mean giving oneself over completely to a mission. B'chol nafshecha, I am devoting myself completely to the mission that's before me. Now, in general terms, that mission for the Jewish people is the mission of the chosen people, what we're supposed to do to bring a light onto the nations, to follow the Torah, to follow the mitzvot. But there are also times in life where we feel this calling. We feel that there is something being set up for us personally. We just get a sense that there's a calling out there for us, a mission for us personally, not just for the Jewish people, but for us as an individual. That God is almost calling our name and pushing us in a direction. At times we listen to that calling, at times we follow that calling. You can ask someone, how did it all get started? And they'll say, I felt that God was putting me in this direction. Then there are times that we get that calling and we wait to let it dissipate, to calm down, and we ignore it. And then we move on with the other things that's in front of us. We can look back and say, oh, at that moment when I was so inspired to do something, I should have jumped and followed. In the winter of 1946, there was a young man by the name of Shimon. And Shimon found himself in a DP camp in Germany. He was a survivor of numerous death camps. This Shimon had a gifted mind, a gifted memory. He actually committed to memory the faces of his Nazi tormentors, wishing one day that he would have the opportunity to seek revenge on those that took the lives of his family. He didn't want to forget the faces of the monsters that did this to him and to his family and to 6 million others. There he is in a DP camp, and there was this American rabbi. He had lived in America originally from Europe, now was part of the American troops, and he was serving as the chaplain for the U.S. Army at that DP camp. And he became friends with Shimon. And one day this chaplain says to Shimon that the United States has learned that there is a castle in Bavaria that the Nazis have used. They wanted to create it to be a museum to the extinct Jewish race. They actually had planned to make a museum that once upon a time there used to be Jews, and here's the proof. And what they did was all the Jewish candelabras, menorahs, tefillin, everything that they took from the Jewish communities were shipped to this particular castle, was being stored there, so that one day they would make exhibits of this was part of the Jewish people that once upon a time existed. That's how thought through the Nazis were about their desire to rid the world of the Jews, that they were already planning the museum that they would make to the extinct Jewish race. And the Americans have asked this chaplain to travel to Bavaria to see if indeed it's true. Is this castle filled with Jewish relics? And being that he didn't want to go alone, he is offering Shimon to travel with him, that he would make arrangements through the United States for him to get whatever paperwork he would need to be able to leave the DP camp and travel together with the chaplain to this particular castle in Bavaria to see if indeed this is there. And so they travel together. They get to this particular castle. They had the instruments needed to break down the door so that they can enter. And they could not believe what they saw. It was a massive warehouse filled from floor to ceiling with all types of ceremonial and ritual items. There were Torah scrolls, there were pairs of tefillin, there were talesim, thousands upon thousands of books, of holy books. There was art, there was menorahs, there were seder plates, there was candlesticks. And the two of them just turned silent, staring at this, realizing that every item they were looking at represented a family. A family that most likely didn't exist anymore, were murdered by the Nazis. So every menorah represented a menorah that once lit in someone's home. A candlestick was once upon a time, just a few years ago, on a Shabbos table. And they divided up and going into different parts of the castle. Shimon went in one part, the chaplain went to the other, taking it all in, seeing all of this that has been looted from the Jewish communities. As Shimon is on one side of the castle, he hears the chaplain give a cry out, a scream. At first he thought it was just the emotion that he was feeling as well. But then it continued, the crying, the sobbing. And so he runs back to the chaplain to check up on him. And he sees the chaplain is sitting on the floor. And he's holding a siddur, a prayer book, in his hand. And he's just looking at the prayer book, staring at it, crying. So Shimon asks him, what is it that you see there? What is it that you're looking at? And so he says, read what's written. Because the person that had this in their hands wrote a message on the front of the synagogue to anyone that would find it. Wrote a message to us. And this is what it said. I am begging whoever finds this siddur to do whatever you can to avenge the deaths of the Jews of Europe. And it was signed by a name that Shimon didn't know. But the chaplain did. It was his own sister. His sister stayed behind in Europe when he went to America. And this entire time, again, before Google and any ability to look up names, he's trying to figure, did his sister survive? Did she not survive? As much as he can try to get help from the United States to find the whereabouts of his sister, he never found out what happened to her. And here he's holding in his hand the siddur of his sister with a note in his sister's handwriting signed by his sister. And the last part of the note said, they are coming. The murderers are among us. I hear them next door. Please avenge their deaths, our deaths. This Shimon was so taken and so shaken. What are the chances that his partner here, this chaplain, would find a prayer book in Bavaria written by his sister in her last moments of life? That he decided right then and there, this was his calling. That the chaplain's sister was talking to him. Shimon, you all know, his name is Simon Wiesenthal. And this is what Simon Wiesenthal, how it all began for him. This is what made his decision. I am giving my life over to this calling. The calling that I just heard right now is speaking to me. This was a message to me. This woman from her grave is telling me what my life's work has to be. In fact, the very first book that Simon Wiesenthal wrote was called The Murderers Among Us. And he devoted it to the chaplain sister. Throughout our lives, we get these signals. Now, we can decide to listen to them and focus and say, this is our calling, or we can just ignore it and let it go by. That's our free choice. That we decide. You see this clearly in a story in the Bible. It's a famous story in the Torah. It's early on in the book of Exodus. And the Torah tells us that God decides that it's time for the Exodus to take place. And it focuses early on in the book of Exodus on one character, right? There's the evil character Pharaoh, and then there's another character. He's introduced to us as a baby in a basket, right? Baby Moses. And we get the story. He's found by Pharaoh's daughter, and he's raised in the palace. On and on it goes until Moses has to run for his life. And then we see a story in the text telling us about this burning bush experience. And that's where God is going to appoint Moses to be the individual to go to Pharaoh and to insist that Pharaoh let the Jewish people go. And ultimately it's going to bring about the plagues. And onwards from there, onwards to Sinai. What happens at that job interview? Right? It's the first job interview recorded in the Torah. It takes place in a strange place. It's not a comfortable air-conditioned office, right? It's in Midian. He's got a flock of sheep with him, and he sees this bush. It's on fire, but it's not being consumed, so he's curious, and God calls out to him, Moses, Moses. And God makes this introductory speech. The cries of the Jewish people have reached me, and I've decided it's time to take them out of exile, and you're the man. Yeah.
I didn't know if we could ask questions.
We can. I'll just repeat the question for the audience.
That burning bush
Yeah.
is claimed to be in St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai. They claim to have it. And I found it to be the unburning bush because I stood there with a cigarette lighter and I couldn't do anything.
It didn't burn?
No.
I'm not sure. There's all different opinions as to where everything is. There's questions where Sinai is. Some claim, I heard lately, that's in Saudi Arabia somewhere. But everyone's got different claims as to where things are. So I'm not an expert on it. But I do know the story tells us it's a thorn bush that was on flames but not being consumed. And in this interview, Moses says no. He's not interested in the job. God says, I want you to take my people out of Egypt. Moses says, Mi anoichi, me? Me? It's not me. Can't be me. If you want to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, you're God. I think you could do a much better job than me. And if you want a human being, choose someone that lives in Egypt. I don't live there anymore. I'm here in Midian. I have to run away to save my life. You got the wrong guy. Mi anoichi, who am I? And God comes back and says, no, I want you to take the job. I've picked you. And again, he'll argue and he'll say, Shlach na b'yat tishlach. Why don't you send my brother Aaron? Send the one that you should send. Aaron lives in Egypt. He's older than me. He's more loved than me by the people. He's a very kind man. Aaron's the guy. Send him. Obviously, Moses is concerned about what are you picking, a younger brother versus an older brother. He remembers, though, he heard about the story of Joseph and the jealousy that comes about. He doesn't want another jealousy problem. Pick Aaron. Pick someone else. And then finally, Moses will say, I can't speak. Moses stuttered. Moses had a speech handicap. He couldn't speak clearly. If you want someone to represent the Jewish people, have an orator, or have someone that can inspire the people, inspire the masses. Have someone that can be a diplomat before Pharaoh. For me, every second word, I stutter. I'm not your guy. And God will continuously argue back with Moses, and this, according to the Medrash, goes on for 7 days, goes on for a full week, until God says, end of conversation, you're going. Moses realizes at some point he can't push this anymore, and he agrees to go. And the rest, as they say, is history, right? But you have to ask this question. Something about that story doesn't make sense to me. I understand where Moses is coming from. Number one, he's a humble man, so he doesn't really want the job. He doesn't believe that he's really fit for the job. He really doesn't. And also, he's not a miracle man. He's not a miracle worker. At least at this point, he's not. There's no way I can convince Pharaoh to let them go. How am I going to take 2 million people out of slavery? I understand Moses. What I don't understand is God's responses. God doesn't really respond to what Moses is saying. He just keeps saying, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. You're the man. You're the man. Why doesn't God respond to the question? Send Aaron? Don't worry about Aaron. He's part of the team. It's going to be a team with you and Aaron. And Aaron's going to be the high priest. And Aaron, by the way, is going to be your spokesperson. He's going to speak for you. He's going to be with you. There's a response to what Moses is saying. God could say something in response to that. But more importantly, my question is, when he says, I have a speech impediment, he's speaking to the greatest doctor in the world that can cure everything. Why doesn't God say, no problem, I'll cure you? Tomorrow morning you're going to wake up and the words are going to flow like Shakespeare. And you're going to have this beautiful voice, and you won't even have to think what words to say. The eloquence will just flow from you. And as far as your stutter, you're healed. You don't even have to go to speech therapy for a year. Done. He's God. He can do anything, right? There's nothing he can't heal. Moses is saying, I have a speech impediment. I can't take this job. God should say, I'll heal you. Moses turns to God to heal a sister. Moses will turn to God to ask for healing for others. So Moses is asking God here, saying, I have a problem. Why doesn't God say, okay, I'll heal it? He doesn't do it. Why not? And I think that God, in this story, in every story of the Torah, is not just telling us a story, but it's teaching us something. We each have that burning bush moment. We each have that time that God in some type of way is communicating with us, and we have our list of excuses. God is saying to us, you don't have to be perfect to take the job I give you. If God would have healed Moses, that would have been a statement that you need to be perfect. You can't have any handicap. You can't have any impediment. Otherwise, it's a good excuse why you can't do the job. Says God, you are who you are the way I made you. With the weaknesses that you have, that's who you are. And the person that you are can do the job I'm putting before you. Don't look for excuses. Perfection, there's no such thing as perfection. In fact, one can make the case that the imperfection that we have is the perfection that God wants us to have. That's who he wants us to be. If it's an illness that we can heal, of course, find the cure. Go to a doctor. Take the medication. But if it's something that is part of who we are, our very essence, don't use it as an excuse. You don't have to be perfect to succeed in life. And we can pick so many different stories of individuals who came to greatness with whatever impediments they had, whatever handicaps they had, once they had the attitude of they can do it. This is the idea of the giving over of self. B'chol nafshecha. You give yourself completely over to the mission at hand. You know, I know we're up to Hanukkah, but from the story of Purim, jumping ahead, we have in the book of Esther. So Esther becomes the queen. Mordechai finds out about the plot against the Jews, and he gets together with his cousin, Queen Esther, and he begs her, go to the king, go to King Ahasuerus, and save your brethren. Plead with him to save the Jewish people. Save them from annihilation, save them from Haman. And then he adds this line to her. Umi yodea, and who knows if this is not the reason why you were selected in the first place to be the queen. If this is not your mission in life, if this is not your reason of existence, that you were born for this is the reason you were placed here. This is your calling right now, this moment. It's not that you happen to live a life and you happen to be chosen as queen and you happen to be in a position that perhaps you can help. No, mi odeo, who knows if this is what it was always all about. This was always meant to be. And now it's your free choice. Do you live out the completion of your mission, of why you were created, why you became queen, or do you walk away from it? Do Jewish children for the next few thousand years dress up as Queen Esther? Do they talk about Esther? Is there a Megillah called Esther because you stepped up to the plate? Or does no one even know about your existence because 100 years after you were queen and you played no role in the saving of the Jewish people, you're just forgotten? Who knows? And this is what Mordechai says to Esther. This is your moment. B'chol nafshecha. This is what it means to give yourself completely over to the mission. Then the Shema says, B'chol me'odecha. B'chol me'odecha means with everything you own, with all of your money, serve God. With all of your energy, serve God. With your charity, serve God. With your possessions, serve God. You see, the idea of giving your life over for some is theoretical. Money is real. That's a daily challenge. The fact is that being Jewish does include a financial sacrifice. Passover is expensive. Right? Buying Hanukkah gifts for everyone is expensive. Kosher food is more expensive than non-kosher food. Taking off from work on Shabbat when it used to be part of the work week. Thank God now in America everyone takes off on Saturday, but it wasn't always that way. It was a great sacrifice. Sending your children to a Jewish day school is not cheap. Mezuzah cost, tefillin cost, tzedakah that you constantly ask for cost. The Torah asks for the sacrifice of money as well. But along with that comes the blessings of wealth. God says, spend on me, and I'll take care of you. At the turn of the 20th century in the city of Tzfas in Israel, there lived a rabbi known as the Ridvaz. His name was Rabbi Yaakov David Wolofsky. He was known by the nickname the Ridvaz. So one year, on his father's yahrzeit, the anniversary of his father's passing, it happened to be a very cold, nasty day out. And the Ridvaz braves the cold, and he goes to the synagogue because he has to say Kaddish for his father. In the afternoon is Mincha prayer. So again, he goes back for Mincha, and they're waiting for the 10th to come. As he's standing by the lectern, the few that were in the synagogue notice that he's crying. Now, okay, it's his father's yahrzeit. It's the anniversary of his father's passing. He must be in an emotional state, so they just back off. But there was one fellow there that felt very close to the rabbi. And he felt, you know what, I can be open with him. And he goes over to the Ridvaz and he says, let me ask you a question. Why are you crying today? Now, I know it's your father's yahrzeit. I know that. But number one, your father lived a very long life. It wasn't as if he died tragically young. That's number one. But number two, he died 50 years ago. I've been with you for many years, and I've never seen this emotion on your father's yahrzeit. And 50 years later, you're standing here and you're crying on the day of your father's passing. Why? So the Ridvaz says, I'll tell you why I'm crying. You see, earlier today when I came for the morning services and it was freezing outside, I was thinking to myself, maybe I should see for the afternoon service that I don't have to go out in the freezing cold to ask if there would be people that would come to my house so I can make a minyan there and say Kaddish in my house so I don't have to walk again in the freezing weather. I didn't end up doing it, but I thought about doing it. And because of that, I'm crying. So, number one, what was wrong with that thought? It's not a bad thought. And number two, you didn't end up doing it anyway. So why are you crying again? So he says, I'm crying because I thought of a story of my father. And he tells him the story. I remember when I was a little boy, we grew up in Poland in a little town called Slutsk. There was no yeshiva in Slutsk. So what there was a private tutor. You hired a tutor. So my father hired for me, his son, the best tutor in town. His name was Rab Sender. Everyone wanted Rab Sender to be the tutor of their children because he was the best. My father got him. I was one of his students. And he would charge 1 ruble a month to be your son's tutor. My father made his living by building furnaces for people in their homes. And one winter business was terrible because there was a shortage of cement and lime. So he couldn't build any furnace. There was no supplies. So he was technically unemployed. And he had no money. 1 month went by, a second month go by, a third month. Reb Sender is not getting his 1 ruble a month. 3 months go by, Reb Sender wasn't paid. Reb Sender was a sweet man. But he let it be known that he needs to put food on his table as well. And if you can't afford to pay me anymore, I understand. I'm not going to go after you for the 3 that you owe, but I'm going to have to find another student to take your son's place so I can at least earn that ruble a month from someone else. He says, my father was so heartbroken because to my father, me receiving the education that Reb Sender can give me was everything to him. And losing that was so bad. That night, my father went to the synagogue to pray. And he hears there that there's a wealthy man who's talking, and he's complaining that his son and daughter-in-law, they just got married, and he built them a beautiful house for them to move into after their wedding. But because of the shortage of cement, there's no furnace in the house. And because there's no furnace and it's freezing outside, they can't move in and they're still living in my house. So if anyone could find someone that could build a furnace in their house, I'll pay them 6 rubles, which was a lot of money. My father came home that night from the synagogue. He had a discussion with my mother, he says. Whatever he asked my mother, she said yes, absolutely. My father took a hammer and took apart the furnace brick by brick in our own home. He then took all of the material that he took apart from our own furnace. He went to this house. He built that furnace for this wealthy man so that their son and daughter-in-law could move in. He took the 6 rubles, he handed it to me, and he said, go to Reb Chaim Sender right now. Tell him 3 rubles are for what I owe him, and the other 3 are for the next 3 months. We froze that winter, but I continued having Reb Sender as my tutor. So when I thought earlier today that it was so cold outside, that maybe I should make the minyan in my house so I can say Kaddish for my father in my house, I thought, what a chutzpah that thought ever came into my mind. To say Kaddish for a man that froze that winter so that I can have my education, that's the way I was going to repay him. I was so upset that I even had this thought that it moved me to tears. These were our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. They gave everything over for Torah, for mitzvot, for God. If they froze, but they had their priorities. They understood what this meant, bechol me'odecha. You give everything over for God. One more story on this. There was a woman who lived in Ramat Gan in Israel. This goes back some years. We'll call her Mrs. Lerner. She had a job working for a company which helped her support her family. And she felt very fortunate. Unemployment was high at that time in Israel. It was hard to find a job. She had a good job. She liked the job. It was a good position. The problem was that unbeknownst to everyone else, except to her and her husband, she was 3 months pregnant. And maternity laws in Israel at the time of the story were not as they are today, and you were worried if you took off once you had the baby, you may not have a job when you're coming back. So although there was still months to go, she started feeling anxiety as soon as she found out she was pregnant. What's going to be after I have the baby? Will I still have a job? Can I come back to a job? What made matters worse was that her husband was unemployed, was laid off. So she was the breadwinner. She was the one supporting the family. What made matters worse was that her brother was also laid off, didn't have money for his own apartment, so he moved in with them. So she's the only income now supporting her family and her brother. And now she's just panicking every single day of what's going to be. So she decides she's going to have to find the right time to speak to the boss. She can't go through the rest of pregnancy with this anxiety. She's going to have to speak to him in advance and get assurances from him in advance that it'll all be okay. Don't worry about it. One afternoon, during lunchtime, this particular company had a cafeteria. Everyone would sit by a table in the cafeteria. And the owner, the boss, comes in. And she thinks to herself, this is a better, comfortable, more environment. It's not in his office. We're all just sitting around the table. And he happens to sit down by her table. This is the time to do it. If ever, this is the time. Let's call the boss Mr. Fisher. Her name was not Lerner, his name was not Fisher, but we're just going to pick other names here. So Mrs. Lerner gathers the courage. And she says, Mr. Fisher, do you mind if I ask you something? Sure, go ahead. And she tells him, no one knows I'm in early pregnancy. My husband has been laid off. My brother's been laid off. And I'm filled with all anxiety about after I have the baby, will you hold the job for me? Because we desperately need it. And he says, we have time to talk about it. If you're just in your third month, it's not the answer she wanted to hear. She wanted to get this done with, that it's secure. And all he said was, we have time to talk about it. And then started other conversations, and other workers came to the table, and other people started other conversations, and what she built herself up for, all of that was just shut down. She felt terrible. And the conversations turned to, where are you from? Where are you from? Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Everyone was talking about their past. And then someone asked her, Mrs. Lerner, where did you grow up? She said, I grew up in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. And Mr. Fisher says, really? You grew up in East Flatbush? I never knew. Where? What street? She tells him the street. And what shul did you go to? We went to this and this shul. And what did your parents do for a living? What did your grandparents do for a living? Asking all these questions, all these questions, all these questions. And then he stood up and left the room. And she was curious about that whole barrage of questions. A few minutes go by. Mr. Fisher comes back. And he says, Mrs. Lerner, I need to tell you something. I want to tell you a story now. Many years ago, there were two electricians who lived in the same neighborhood in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. One of these electricians was a union member. He belonged to a large group. He was quite successful. The other was a non-union electrician. And he did jobs when someone needed an emergency, he was called to fix it, but he struggled to make a living. He didn't have constant work. And he struggled greatly. These two men went to the same synagogue in East Flatbush, and they got to know each other. They're both electricians, working for different companies, but they got to know each other. In fact, one would walk the other one home from shul every Friday night, and they would talk. One day, tragedy struck. The poor electrician had a massive heart attack, and within a few days, he passed away. The other electrician, the successful one, obviously came to the Shiva house, and he saw the level of poverty that was there. He was a nosy fellow, so he walked into the kitchen, and he opened the refrigerator, and he saw that there was nothing there. And he opened the pantries, and he saw that there was very little there. He got into his car, he went to the supermarket, and within an hour he came back with shopping bags filled with everything. Breads and meats and dairy, everything he possibly can. And he himself started filling the pantries, filling the refrigerator. Okay, it's Shiva time. People do that. People bring food to Shiva time. It wasn't so odd. But the next day again, he restocked. And every day he restocked. And Shiva was over and he wouldn't stop. He did shopping for his family. He did shopping for this other electrician's family. This went on week after week, and as much as the widow kept on saying, Shiva is over, it's enough, he refused to listen. And just like everything that he purchased for his own home, he purchased food for them. And one day the widow says to him, listen, my husband kept all of his supplies in the basement. The entire basement is filled with electrical stuff. You have been so kind to us and to our family. Why don't you take everything that's down there? You're an electrician. You can use this stuff. I don't even know what it is. Pack it all up and take it. It's yours. So the fellow goes down to the basement, and it's a mess. It's a turmoil. Everything is everywhere. Nothing is organized. So he asks the widow, are you okay if I come here every night after work just to organize things into different boxes? Sure. And that's what he did. Every night after work, he would come to this basement until he had cleaned everything up, organized everything into various different boxes. He then sent out a letter to all the electricians in New York that there's going to be a sale of electrical supplies on this and this day. A Sunday, he picks a Sunday, sets up everything outside the house. Everyone's coming for this bazaar for these bargains. He raises about $8,000 in this sale, which he gave to the widow. And she said, no, I said, you can have it. He says, absolutely not. This is yours. Everyone's listening to Mr. Fisher tell this story in Ramat Gan in some company. He then says, Mrs. Lerner, the electrician who organized that sale, who brought food to that widow and children for months, was your grandfather, Tzvi Ackerman. And I was one of those orphans that watched him do it. Your grandfather was there for me, for my siblings, and for my mother when we had no one. You can rest assured you will work here for every single day, whenever you want. You can take off as much as you want when you have that baby. You will be paid for every single day. Please tell your husband to come here tomorrow with your brother. I have jobs for them as well. B'chol me'odecha. Our job is to give and to do when we see a need. We see someone in need, we jump. If God lets us see that someone is in need, there's a reason we're seeing it, because there's something we can do to help. God will find his ways to repay you. God doesn't remain in debt. You step up for him, he will step up for you. Maybe it's not right away. Maybe it's years later. Maybe it's a generation later. But Tzvi Ackerman saw a need. There was a widow, there were orphans, there was an empty refrigerator and an empty pantry. And he can't eat dinner at night knowing that there are some orphans that just lost a father that don't have food. Did he think that his granddaughter one day would be pregnant with anxiety, living in Ramat Gan, Israel, and would need a job? It didn't enter his mind. What entered his mind is, as a Jew, as a human being, my job is when I see that there's people in need, is to step up. B'chol me'odecha. This is what the Shema is saying to us, where we have to remind ourselves of this every morning, every evening. We give ourselves over b'chol levavcha, with all of our heart, b'chol nafshecha, all of our soul, b'chol me'odecha, all of our possessions. I'll conclude for my audience that's listening on Zoom and later on YouTube, and for those that are here. We are going to have this match campaign. Many of you have already gone on our website. And this is to raise funds for charity for those that are in need. And there are two very generous matchers that every dollar that you give, each of them will match it, which means every dollar you give is multiplied by 3, is tripled, just during this window of time, from now until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. So in honor of Thanksgiving and in honor of Hanukkah, whatever you can give as a gift of charity, again, will be tripled, and it'll all go to help people in need. B'chol me'odecha. All you can do is you can go to our website, chabadconejo.com / the word match, M-A-T-C-H, or you can just drop me an email and tell me any amount you want me to put down for you. It'll be submitted to the matchers, and this way your gift will be tripled in honor of the holidays and in honor of giving charity. I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, a very happy Hanukkah. We will have class next Wednesday on Hanukkah, 12:30. We look forward to seeing you then. Take care, everyone.